When you look at Disney, you mostly think about the Disney princesses and what they bring overall to the stories they are a part of. Something that I have talked about a lot over here and what many misunderstand about the older Disney princesses, and the new ones, and of course the crucial detail that is also important to their characters. And that detail, my friends, is of course the Disney princess in this case that accompany them, which have become a very underrated element when it comes to Disney characters overall and the previous conversations we have talked about. Because when it comes to fairy tales, most people already know the typical trope of the boy and girl getting together as royals of their very kingdoms and living happily ever after. The princess longing for something in her life and finding that in the love of her prince to come. But looking at that progression for Disney, we really find that there is much more to that than meets the eye. Because beyond the Disney princesses we all cover that many somehow misunderstand, these princes actually get much more bad rap about them specifically, especially in modern times, about the old ones. And once again, the live action films also show this to the degree they are willing to prop up their female heroes instead at the very end, removing the important arcs of those very characters that they went through, or despite adding more to the character, it still forgot the main detail of why they were written that way in the first place, where somehow once again Cinderella actually understood these characters so much better in that film. But this all comes from the fact that the original Disney princes had no character at all, where the prince from Snow White and Prince Charming from Cinderella had really no real presence in their own stories, and it really shows. But that didn't mean they were actually bad characters, where by the time Sleeping Beauty actually rolled around, they actually improved those characters, starting with Philip, where we got more interesting and actually great characters, and even ones that actually began not as princes at the beginning like Aladdin and starting out as a lowly street rat but growing to become the love of Princess Jasmine and breaking down royal barriers. It's just that initial period that affected people's opinions that misunderstand that they clearly have more to offer as different characters than what meets the eye. And it's something I thought best to start with talking myself and showcasing my appreciation to some who are underrated and actually grew for the better. And once again, we do have to start with Snow White and the criticism of the characters like the prince being a stalker and whatnot. A statement that isn't true in the slightest when he isn't really even in the film a whole lot. Where the point about Snow White is her achieving her dreams and goals and her situation being subtly abused by her own stepmother being the queen. He just literally rides on his horse one day and hears her lovely voice and wants to check it out. Nothing really warranting to him being stalking her unless you do count that he does suddenly appear next to her where she runs inside before he sings to her. Where actually besides that, that is his only major scene until the very end of the movie, where when I literally watched it again and again, he's nowhere to be seen until that very end point and only here in the beginning. And of course, the end of the movie only also takes place a year after the queen's death, an entire year, meaning 365 days of him searching for her after the initial meeting where he actually left quite after when she was going to meet the hunter for the first time during the next scene. And yeah, looking back on it, it is kind of disappointing that this is the amount that his character had, but also the only really thing that they could actually do with the resources they had for a project like this at this time. They clearly wanted more for his character, and seen by its production and what you research online, but couldn't really do it because of how much Walt already poured into the film itself and how the focus was mainly on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs instead. He is more of the gateway into these stories as we would see and should be appreciated instead of actually being torn down. Yes, he's not there much, but he's not actually doing anything harmful. Like seriously, she got poisoned by an apple and got set up in a coma by a bitch who values her own beauty above others, where the only way to break it was actually through true love's kiss that he could save her. It's just impossible for that very story for anything other than that to happen, and what she wanted herself to be a part of to be awakened in her life once again, and that's just how it was written, and that's what we have to deal with. Yes, he definitely needed more character to him, but it didn't mean he was bad in any way and just actually putting others down like Snow White herself. Just a positive fellow who actually connected with someone who stayed true to who she was as a person in the events of the film for a story that could be told a certain way, and certainly what they thought about expanding into more stories later on, where once again, Cinderella focused more on their heroine as well. Because this comes with a character that has actually grown in reception over the years up until this point, especially with what this particular franchise actually offers that is better than anything else that Disney has produced franchise-wise, especially with what a film like Cinderella 3 actually provided. And for the sake of consistency, I'm just going to solely focus on these animated ones and not the live action films, even though I do agree that they truly expand upon his character without ruining him and actually making him better overall, but also should be appreciated that they still kept him in the same role and fleshed him out more where they actually wanted the original to be, because during the events of the original film, the king does want his son to marry and continue the royal bloodline, where he's been a bit stubborn at this point about it, trying to find the right one, trying to find someone that actually fits his own interests, where he connected with Cinderella the night of the ball. And yes, in the first film, there clearly isn't a lot similar to Snow White, but you can infer more about his character in some way, especially what he specifically wants out of his life rather than just another maiden his father wants so he can marry to have kids, that he longs for something more to connect with and just found it with this particular girl whom he actually didn't know a lot about, that we knew that she had been abused by her stepfamily and worked as a lowly maid to actually get by. And these things that we infer from the beginning is what Disney themselves actually worked towards developing in Cinderella 3 that I explained not too long ago, that it clearly still went on the same path with the original story and decided to flesh out a little bit better. It didn't take anything away from that obviously for what story it was, but just showed more of what could have been intended for his particular character, how he specifically connected with Cinderella that night, and how he tries to call back to that with his own mother and father whom they both loved dearly. These are things that many people ignore on the surface when they try to complain about these movies in particular, where we don't seek the hidden elements or nuances of a character at first because we don't see the time frame it came out and dismissing them as wrong and outdated just because of that, when there clearly is a way that it could be shown that it's not like that at all. It's fine to criticize these two earlier princes for being like that, but it doesn't mean that they are bad who undeservedly saved the prince in the end. They were just there as the bonuses for the journey as intended and clearly had their own desires in life, but didn't actually reach that point, where when we do see it, we clearly actually do enjoy them, and we're thankful for actual sequels that can provide content that supplements that, especially charming above all in Cinderella 3, where everyone agrees up until this point he is the best character overall in that film because he's given time to see what he can do and what he cares about, and also jumping out of a window. And because of this is what led to Prince Philip in Sleeping Beauty, who was actually named after the late Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth II. And this was a character with much more intent to have development from the get-go than the actual main character herself, this time in Aurora, that had much of her screen time actually reduced compared to her previous princesses. Now this doesn't mean he was a fully fleshed out character with its own unique story, but it nevertheless showed something more than what we previously got, and something that took the older ideas that they had for the characters like the prince from Snow White, especially when he gets captured by Maleficent, how the evil queen in the original was going to capture that other dude, and now they tried to dive back in here to show that instead. And thinking about it, this does feel like a movie trying to answer those very criticisms and problems that actually did show up at first, that they were willing to do something different where both princesses get cursed and fall asleep and the main evil woman tries to be on top, but literally falls in the very end, just switching up the main character for most of the story, where we know in the story he was originally going to marry Aurora as that's what their two kingdoms were wished by their parents, but when he had met Aurora, who was actually protected and living as a regular peasant girl named Briar Rose, he assumed she was someone else and not the princess he was actually to be wedded to, and wanted her instead, showcasing more to his character that learned from the previous two who wanted something that he loved rather than what he was designated to do, and vice versa for Aurora, where both parties just didn't know that they were actually them in the first place. This film was truly a great step that showcased how animation is truly a wonderful art form that expressed so much within its story than what people actually thought possible, and how you can have brave and charming princes as well, where he does have a bit of fun to him as well, and that's to be appreciated. It's still not as much as you would expect for newer main characters, but it's pretty great for a movie that can be regarded as the quintessential fairy tale movie. But this led the way for more male Disney heroes to come out, as we saw that actually started out with Pinocchio to a now bigger degree. Of course, they aren't princes like we're talking about right now, but they went into developing their other boy characters into much more overtime with stories like Peter Pan and of course A Sword in the Stone with King Arthur, which wasn't good for his very character, but at least it was a main focus, and I'll give him that, and the benefit that he becomes a royal even though he wasn't a prince, but still taking the steps for other future Disney princes that gave the way for Eric in The Little Mermaid. Because with the return of Disney fairy tales, we got to see the true evolution of the prince character culminating in someone who yearns for his love of the sea, one who loves exploring and then falling in love with the woman who rescued him from the sea, or the voice that did when he almost drowned. And when he first sees Ariel, he is happy to help her despite being disappointed she may not be the one he seeks considering she can't speak, but still willing to give her a place to stay and treating her right. Another great trait about him is how shy he really is. He gets scared easily by Ariel's forwardness when they ride out, and when he doesn't want to actually dive to kiss the girl despite what they want him to do in that very moment, which really makes those lyrical changes in the remake quite stupid because it shows you didn't really actually care to rewatch the original at all. But the greatest thing above all is how much he actually cares about Ariel despite who she really is, because we know from Triton he doesn't really trust them at all and thinks that they're evil, but he shows someone who's worthy of being trusted and good when he goes out of his way to stab Ursula so that he could save Ariel, which showed the actual good in humanity that changed Triton's heart in the end to actually give Ariel what she wanted, that he demonstrates compassion and empathy for others, just being selfless for the sake of love no matter who you are as a person, and that is well rewarded by the very end. There may not be a whole lot like what the remake wanted to explore for his character, but it did certainly show a lot more for a princess who are actually a positive impact on those around him in society despite what others others say, and how much people forget that role that they played in the remake that was actually important, that the love that he had really opened up the hearts of others, and that is something worthy of respecting rather than removing, as Disney likes to do nowadays with their very own characters. And after this, it led to other great fairy tales with characters like the Beast, who had a lot more than what we previously knew in our heroes and princes. More complexity to it that began with the arrogant prince who rejected those beneath him until revealed otherwise that cursed him and his castle for eternity, unless he did learn to love another. And having him as a character is truly a step up for someone perceived as a monster for his own arrogance, but actually finding more when he actually spends time with Belle, by actually having what most people think that these princes are like, as arrogant snobs who are raised privileged lives and not worthy of being saving the day. And because of that, the enchantress just elevated those qualities of him at the beginning by turning him into a beast and having those primal animalistic instincts, being grumpy and selfish, where it really shows that he is someone who just wants to be loved. The beast's dual nature just made him truly uncertain of ever becoming human again or learning to love, especially when many couldn't even recognize him as being human. He was just ashamed of this monstrous aspect of himself, as it was a reminder of what he both had done in the past and what he had become. Where having this kind of conflict and duality to his character really showed how much Disney had grown from their first prince, adding so many layers and so many ways you can make a typical fairy tale love story work even better than before. The more you spend time to know him like Belle did, the more you actually sympathize with him, not knowing if he's going to make it in the end with his own personal battles, not thinking that Belle would actually save him or anyone else, knowing what he is at this point or at the end when Gaston almost succeeds in killing him. And the other great part about him is how you get to see him for who he truly is, where the real beast is man himself, portrayed in Gaston being more than what you see, where he acts more selfless for Belle, giving what she wants and letting her leave when she likes, where he really does mature and develop in the end, giving so much for her, where he was well rewarded by having that curse lifted. It's how it's really about his journey to learn what love really means for him and why we need to care for others in our lives, to value it to the fullest, especially from a position that the prince has as a royal figure who lives up higher than most to begin with. And when we see from that perspective, we get down and grounded with other characters like Aladdin, who is probably one of the best princes out there, mainly by the fact he isn't a prince at the beginning and only becomes one at the very end of the franchise, because nobody would expect a street rat to ever attain or meet a royal in his life, where he was chased by guards for all of his life for stealing bread and whatnot to survive, that he sticks strong for the sake of living and finds that opportunity with the genie to meet the woman he actually loves. For of course, we also know that he was willing to give his freedom to the genie once he had that opportunity for love to be fulfilled by his 3 wishes, learning something more important about friendship as well alongside the course of the story, which is the real heart of it all. How he tussles with the idea of trying to win the love of the princess whom he met while she disguised herself, and trying to do it in a way that fits the law of the kingdom, where he also has to promise to the genie to set him free at the very end, trying to be someone he's not when we know through people like the genie that he should really be himself, and realizing that when Jafar actually captures him and reveals Aladdin truly finally to them, where he does learn to use the skills that he had before to save them and actually achieve the desires and goals as a result. It's where you learn that pretending to be a prince is not what you want to do to impress girls like Jasmine, but being more of who you truly are, and that's why she loved him in the end. For the fact that he wasn't some prince in that regard, but gets to be in the end for being a street rat, actually having someone to connect with the common folk who live their lives in the kingdom. And overall, it was truly a great way to close this new era of princes, as the next few movies would focus on individuals who weren't prince or princesses until The Princess and the Frog. I mean, yes, during this time we have another ruler, Emperor Kuzco, who is a pretty fantastic Disney protagonist, but he still isn't a prince overall in this case from beginning, because he is an emperor, where we still had to wait until The Princess and the Frog to return to that very point with Prince Naveen. This time, we return to a very arrogant and naive prince who had been cut off from his usual funds from his very parents, because compared to the Beast, he wasn't really antagonistic in that sense, who really brushed off others, but more just like a spoiled brat who just loved his privileged upbringing, who did have a good heart and a very great taste for music, playing the ukulele, but just extremely vain and wanting to woo the ladies, whom Tiana could actually see right through. But that doesn't mean he wasn't worthy of being a prince despite these shortcomings, because the strong-willed and ambitious Tiana would actually heavily influence the prince and would unknowingly bring out the best of his very character, motivating him to alter his dreams and actually make something of himself, that he learns he could make the best of his life, and finding that through her determination to fulfill her dreams, which he would see to helping in the very end. And like the Beast in this case, he does have to learn as a different creature to actually understand this, as a frog in this case to appreciate the natural world around him that actually works and see more than what he knows and what he values as time goes on, seeking to work hard with Tiana at the very end and accomplishing their dreams. So once again, this is a huge step in the evolution of the Prince characters, where that initial beginning of regular nice guys to arrogant jocks and so forth expands the amount of storytelling possibilities that they can have to tell. And of course, this leads us to one who is regarded as the best Disney prince ever in Eugene Fitzherbert from Tangled, who I've actually praised before. And he's certainly the most interesting character who was actually a prince before the movie, and of course future content, and then again with what we know in the beloved series. But just speaking about the movie itself, just shows that it's really nice to have a thief again develop to become the prince and his venture with Rapunzel, just learning to find out what his life is actually all about. Out of everyone I just talked about here, I think he does have the most personality of the Disney princes, where he tries to use his charms to smooch his way out of situations but fails badly, where his relationship with Maximus is also brilliant and adds to the charm of this character being super fun and being the first 3D fairy tale that they have produced. Tangled is truly a movie that has dual protagonists, where both Rapunzel and Eugene share that role for the time they have in the movie about finding the goal that they both have, but they don't realize that at first, growing and discovering it together along the way. I mean, yes, for him it's a priceless tiara and the lanterns at first were for Rapunzel, but knowing both of their characters is truly what's more important to the story, and for Eugene, who's more than what he thinks he is, defending and protecting Rapunzel throughout, learning to actually live for her, rather than wandering aimlessly throughout his life for himself. It's where, despite his initial attitude that showed he cared more about himself at first, is where we really learned that he really does care for others, especially knowing with what Mother Gothel had done to Rapunzel, where she was a slave for her own petty desires, where he did what he could to stop that even though it meant he was going to die. The great thing that Disney was able to do with all of their princes was to showcase the difference between the surface and emotional levels that they actually display, that their hearts show much more than their initial brash attitude, and that they are more than what they seem, like diamonds in the rough. How we portray these characters as a standard definition of a fairy tale prince, but then break them down as time goes on, and how most can actually subvert our expectations of what they really are like on the inside, and it's why these characters succeed very well. But then again, that doesn't mean those subversions can work in other regards, considering the last princes we got on screen from this moment come from Frozen, because that's where things take a little bit sour turn because of our dumbass twist villain and a character who gets shafted a lot in both movies. I mean, with what they had for them originally, it was very nice and we should focus on that, where it presents a choice that Anna had to make with an ice maker and an actual prince for where she wanted to go in her life, but fell short with where they actually changed them for Elsa in that very story. But at the very least, I like those elements of what Kristoff provided to Anna that showcase more than what she knows about love and what other people are like, taking more time to grow together even though that wasn't very well done, and then showcasing how people are more than what they seem despite connecting with Hans in so many ways, because they do try to put Anna and Hans in the same boat in the very beginning with the red hair, royals, younger siblings, which is an absolutely fine thing to do, to have them connected together where Anna actually discovers and figures more about others, where a connection to Hans actually really doesn't work at all in the end, which is what they should have done instead of the derp, I'm the villain now, fuck you. Just truly a disappointing thing for the character when it could have had a clear, better message overall. But then again, having a rugged man engaged the princess is also a nice change of pace. It's to find more than what meets the eye and what she already knew in her life that was sheltered inside, and that's actually alright I guess, but just wish it was fully fleshed out. And if they actually did that, then he would be a pretty great prince on his own. Just a man and his reindeer and his family of trolls while he actually lives in a castle. But overall, what remains to be seen here is characters that have actually been underrated and somewhat misunderstood for what they bring to the table. That they aren't outright bad characters as princes and whatnot, but it's more what they bring on the inside that counts. That we can see a clear reason to why they love their counterparts or become much more than that with their own life goals and dreams. This isn't to say they are forgotten parts of the movies because they clearly are popular in their own right, but just how some sweep them under the rug because of what they represent as the goal for a princess, but are actually much more underneath with what stories can be told and will be told for years to come. Yes, the initial period was rough and they didn't actually have any characters at all, but it should be celebrated at least that they were actual positive figures overall and helped the characters achieve their own destinies. And I just hope more people would actually celebrate them too, because they are pretty great characters with relatable flaws and actually grew over time for Disney's successful stories that they can all eventually overcome. And with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.